Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking Chapter 6 of the fantastic Modern Telecommunications tutorial series from Virtualization Options LLC. They're a Colorado-based technology research, education, and advisory organization, and this 15-part series is just incredible. We're going to explore the massive journey of how we went from simple copper wires carrying telegraph pulses all the way up to the AI-driven, programmable digital fabric of our future. So if you've ever wanted to truly understand the invisible infrastructure powering modern civilization, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
All right, we're going to jump right in with a staggering number, 340 undecillion. That is a 340 followed by 36 zeros. It actually represents the exact number of addresses available in the IPv6 protocol. It's a frankly incomprehensible figure, but it perfectly highlights the massive global scale of modern networks. We're already connecting billions of devices, right? But very soon we'll be connecting trillions of sensors, vehicles, and smart environments. So how did we actually build a network capable of that kind of scale?
To see how we got to this invisible fabric of connectivity, we're going to trace the evolutionary arc of telecommunications chronologically through 5 major leaps: connectivity foundations, the digital revolution, the internet protocol era, virtualizing the network, and finally, the 6G horizon. Let's kick things off with Part 1, connectivity foundations and the physical reality.
Think of modern telecommunications infrastructure as a 3-layer cake. Down at the base, you've got the physical layer. This is your raw transmission media, the cables, the fiber optics, the amplifiers, just moving raw signals. Right above that sits the logical layer, which encompasses the protocols and addressing schemes that actually direct that data where it needs to go. And then at the very top, you have the application layer, which delivers the actual user-facing services we rely on every day, like voice calls, video streams, and web browsing.
Now, the mathematical magic that actually made these modern networks possible is the Nyquist-Shannon sampling theorem. Basically, it proves that you can perfectly reconstruct a continuous analog signal, like a human voice, from digital samples, as long as you sample it at a rate that is at least twice its highest frequency. It's absolutely crucial for moving us from noisy analog lines to flawless digital regeneration.
So how does that theorem play out in reality? Well, it literally builds the fundamental math of a phone call. Because the human voice occupies a frequency range up to about 3,400 Hz, engineers safely chose a sampling rate of 8,000 times per second to easily hit that Nyquist minimum. Each one of those samples is quantized into 8 bits. So 8,000 samples times 8 bits, that yields the classic 64 kilobits per second channel. That incredibly specific 64 kbps formula established the foundational unit of capacity that still underpins global telephony today. But how do we manipulate these signals to share the airwaves? That all comes down to modulation, which is how we encode information onto a high-frequency carrier signal. Comparing AM to FM shows us a pretty clear evolution. Amplitude modulation, or AM, varies the strength of the wave. It's super simple, but it's highly susceptible to interference and noise. Frequency modulation, or FM, varies the frequency instead. This offers far greater noise immunity and audio fidelity, which is exactly why FM completely dominated broadcast radio for high-quality music transmission.
Here's a fun fact, though. Networks wouldn't be economically viable for millions of users without a concept called statistical multiplexing. Basically, it's overbooking. Just like an airline sells more tickets than there are physical seats on a plane, internet service providers routinely oversubscribe their links by ratios of 20-to-1, sometimes even more. They're just relying on the statistical improbability that every single user is going to download a massive file at the exact same millisecond. It's literally the economic engine of modern telecommunications.
Moving right along to Part 2, the digital revolution in the massive paradigm shift it brought.
This era completely changed how we handle traffic. The old public switched telephone network, the PSTN, relied on circuit switching. When you made a call, a dedicated physical path was held exclusively open just for you, even if both people on the line were completely silent. It was consistent, for sure, but profoundly wasteful. The internet, on the other hand, uses packet switching. It chops data into tiny packets and dynamically shares capacity on demand. It's incredibly efficient for bursty internet traffic.
To scale this digital revolution across whole continents, engineers had to cook up standardized digital hierarchies. In North America, they created the T1 carrier, which brilliantly bundles 24 of those 64 kbps voice channels into a single 1.544 megabit per second bit stream. Meanwhile, Europe adopted the E1 standard, bundling 30 voice channels. For decades, these standards were the absolute backbone of global enterprise networking.
Now, to manage all this growing complexity, the OSI reference model was standardized back in 1984, and honestly, it remains the most important conceptual framework in all of networking. It takes the insanely complex problem of moving data and divides it into distinct, manageable layers. You've got Layer 1 handling the physical cables and bits, Layer 2 managing Ethernet frames and local switching, Layer 3 dealing with IP addressing and global routing, and Layer 4 handling the transport, ensuring reliable delivery with protocols like TCP. It gives IT professionals a universal vocabulary for designing and troubleshooting systems. Which brings us nicely to Part 3, the Internet Protocol era, where connectivity truly scaled up. Remember that insane 340 undecillion number from the start? Well, here's exactly why it matters. We originally built the internet on IPv4, which only allowed for about 4.3 billion addresses. We quickly started running out of those as mobile phones and laptops exploded in popularity. We used a clever trick called network address translation, or NAT, to hide multiple devices behind one address just to buy us some time. But moving to IPv6 expands the address space to 128 bits. It gives us those 340 undecillion addresses, meaning we completely eliminate scarcity. Now, every single IoT device can have its own direct, globally routable address with no NAT required.
You know, the internet isn't actually one big monolith. Well, actually, it's a network of networks. It's composed of roughly 80,000 independent networks, called autonomous systems, run by all sorts of different companies, universities, and governments. The specific protocol that stitches all of these competing networks together into one functional internet is called BGP, the Border Gateway Protocol. Without exaggeration, BGP literally holds the internet together.
To make wide-area networks faster for massive enterprises, engineers had to rethink standard IP routing. See, standard routing requires every single router along a path to do a full database lookup to figure out where a packet goes next. That takes time. MPLS, or multi-protocol label switching, totally solved this by attaching a short, fixed-length label to the data. Routers just do a lightning-fast label swap at hardware wire speeds, which enables high-performance traffic engineering and quality of service for critical voice and data. Let's look at Part 4, virtualizing the network, where software essentially eats the hardware. For the longest time, if you needed a router or a firewall, you went out and bought a proprietary, purpose-built metal box. Network Function Virtualization, or NFV, changes the game entirely. It decouples those network functions from the dedicated hardware. So now, your firewalls, your load balancers, your switches, they all just run as virtualized software applications on standard off-the-shelf servers in the cloud.
And this virtualization completely revolutionized voice calls too. Modern voice architectures use what are called soft switches. They separate the software that sets up the call, the signaling, from the actual hardware handling the audio media. This means that massive enterprise phone systems, like IP-PBSs, are no longer giant racks of telephony hardware sitting in a basement somewhere. They're simply software applications riding right on top of a virtualized IT infrastructure.
And finally, that brings us to Part 5, the 6G horizon and the programmable fabric.
Targeted for commercial deployment around 2030 under the IMT 2030 framework, the concepts driving 6G are straight out of science fiction. We're talking about reconfigurable intelligent surfaces, literally programmable panels on buildings that reflect and bend radio signals around corners, like smart mirrors. We'll see ultramassive MIMO with tens of thousands of antenna elements tracking individual users. We're looking at terabit per second speeds and non-terrestrial networks where LEO satellites seamlessly integrate with ground towers. In 6G, the last mile is basically being replaced by the last beam.
Now, a huge question for the future of the Internet of Things is how we power all of this. 6G is explicitly designing networks to support zero-energy devices. These are sensors that don't need batteries at all. Instead, they harvest their operating power directly from ambient indoor lighting, the vibrations of machinery, or even by absorbing the ambient radio frequency signals floating in the air around them. It's wild stuff.
And that builds to what is arguably the most mind-bending convergence coming our way: Integrated Sensing and Communication, or ISAC. In the 6G era, the exact same radio waves transmitting your data will simultaneously act like radar. They'll actively perceive, map, and model the physical environment in real time, sensing gestures, mapping autonomous vehicle routes, and even monitoring passive health metrics. The network literally becomes a distributed sensing system.
Which leaves us with a pretty massive, provocative thought. We are moving from a world where telecom was just about carrying a voice call over a copper wire to an era where the network is essentially a programmable nervous system for the entire planet. As this infrastructure gains the ability to sense, perceive, and respond to the physical world autonomously using AI, how in the world will we manage, secure, and govern a communications network that is simultaneously a planetary-scale surveillance and sensing device? It's an absolutely fascinating challenge for the next generation of IT professionals. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer of Chapter 6 from Virtualization Options LLC. Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.